I've been fascinated by Greek mythology ever since I was a kid, but that doesn't mean I can pronounce the names. There's going to be a lot of mispronounced names in this video, people. I apologize in advance. Now, I'm not going to be talking about books by Edith Hamilton or Thomas Bulfinch or Robert Graves or Philip Freeman. Those are like scholarly books that retell Greek myths, and those are great. But I'm talking about books that like take Greek myths and make them into novels. Now, this first one I don't think is as well written as the other books I'm going to get to, but it's for kids, and like I said, I started being interested in Greek mythology when I was just a kid, so I thought I'd do a little something for the youngsters. Okay, Greek Heroes by Geraldine McCaughrean. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I can't even pronounce English names. This is actually like four little novels in one big, like they're collected in one volume. It's like a series. Each one tells the story of a different famous Greek mythic hero. There's Perseus, Hercules, Theseus, and Odysseus. And yes, I know that in Greek his name is Heracles. Hercules is the Roman name, but this book says Hercules, so that's what we're going with. A quirk of the book is that while it presents these stories in the order they were supposed to happen in Greek mythology, it says that the story of Perseus happened last. That's how it portrays it, when really it was supposed to be first, like Perseus was the ancestor of Hercules. I guess the Perseus book was just written last, and the author wanted it to be the grand finale. Well, like I said, the writing in this book isn't as beautiful as in the other books I'm going to talk about. It's still pretty good. Like this passage about Penelope, waiting for her husband Odysseus to come home. Perhaps it was true what they told her, that Odysseus would not come and would not come and would not ever come, that his soul was already pining in the realm of shadows, and now her only son was setting off across the heartless sea, whose waves were always arriving, always coming home to the shores of Ithaca, but always with empty arms. And the characterizations are fun and engaging. Like, not always super deep, but fun and engaging. And you can tell the author did research because there are actually a lot of little details from ancient sources in here. Like, the blood dripping from the head of Medusa causes snakes, and that's why there's snakes in the desert. Or people mistaking Theseus for a girl when he first came to Athens because of his long hair. The thing about adapting the stories of Greek mythics heroes as children's adventure stories is that the Greek idea of a hero was someone who was really good at killing people and monsters. Not really our definition of a hero. Like, the closest one to our definition of a hero is Perseus, and you could argue that his book works the most well because of that. Hercules gets cleaned up a little bit, mostly his relationship with Iole, but he still goes crazy and kills his wife and children and has to atone for it. And he has other fits of temper. It's not so sort of a happy medium. With Theseus, they actually really delve into him being an anti-hero. I mean, he's not a rapist in this version, but he's still pretty bad. Like, there's this great quote when he meets the Minotaur, or the Minotaur, however you pronounce it, where the monster says to him, "I am a man encased in the nature of a bull. I am an animal cursed with the vices of a man. I am a beast imprisoned forever in the dark horrors of the labyrinth. What is your excuse, young man?" So the Theseus book actually ends up being the most interesting in my opinion. With Odysseus, they pretty much just keep all of the anti-heroic things he did without comment. Like, they don't really make him more sympathetic, and they don't really critique him. Because of that, I feel like the Odysseus book is the least successful. Like, it's not really saying anything new about the character. but it's still well written. The next book is The God Beneath the Sea by Leon Garfield and Edward Blishen, or Blishen. I don't know much about him, but I've read a lot of other books by Leon Garfield, and he's seriously underrated. He might have one of the best prose style I've ever heard, or read, not heard. Here's this great passage when it's talking about the deluge, that's sort of the Greek myth equivalent of Noah's flood. Now the waters began to creep up the slopes of the mountains where the last men had fled for refuge. At first they helped each other, brother pulling brother up the sharp rocks and carrying wives and children in straining arms. Some even went back for those who were trapped in muddy crevices and dragged them free. Then savage Ares, or Ares, we'll do Ares. Then savage Ares, god of hateful war, opened their eyes to the dwindling land on which they were crowding together. They began to struggle and fight for their places. They began to hack at one another with such weapons as they had, and the water around the mountaintops swirled with red. Those who still climbed were kicked back to their deaths, and one by one, those who had achieved safety were hurled from it by those who were stronger. Fathers abandoned their children, and husbands thrust out their wives. Then at last the waters put an end to their savagery and engulfed them all, dragging away the last two men who were locked in a murderous embrace. But they were not drowned. Their hands still grasped their knives, which were lodged each in the belly of his brother. Here's another really interesting passage about Ares. It's from a scene when the gods are quarreling amongst themselves. Murderous Ares alone was grinning as he clashed from god to god and urged the joyous frenzy of universal war. Such was the gift of Ares, that he seemed mad and savage only when he was on the other side. His hot breath in the ear was always the whisper of a divine god. This book retells a bunch of famous Greek myths, like you've got Persephone and Pandora. I love what they do with Pandora. Like she's a character who's sort of responsible for bringing destruction to mankind, but she was created by the gods to do so. So do we see her as like a villain or a victim? I think this book finds a really nice happy medium between those two portrayals. Now, something this book does that the last book I talked about doesn't do particularly well is that it's heartwarming. The Greek myths are not usually heartwarming. They're like either tragic, cool, or gross. Now, the titular god beneath the sea isn't Poseidon. It's Hephaestus, the god of the forge, who was thrown out of Mount Olympus as a baby and grew up beneath the sea. Now, you may know from Greek mythology that he had initially a bad relationship with his mother. How he goes from wanting revenge on her to becoming her defender in this book is I think it's really beautiful. I'll admit though, the last third of the book, where it's mostly about the myth of Sisyphus, isn't as great as the preceding parts. It's not bad, but I guess I just don't find the story of Sisyphus that compelling. Garfield and Blishen's follow-up to the God Beneath the Sea was The Golden Shadow. It retells the myth of Heracles, and with a couple of other myths thrown in about heroes. They do the Caledonian boar hunt, since Heracles married the sister of Meleager, and because they tell about Meleager, they kind of have to tell about Atalanta too. It's actually kind of interesting to read sort of a negative portrayal of Atalanta. In our post-feminist society, she's usually seen sympathetic, but what they write about here isn't untrue. Something I didn't really talk about when I talked about God Beneath the Sea was its sense of humor. I mean, it's not super humorous, but The Golden Shadow does have a sense of humor. Here's how they describe King Aegeus. He's the one who had the super stinky stables that Heracles had to clean out. Strange that a pair so cultured and fastidious as Eurystheus and his queen should have such a friend as filthy Aegeus, but there were reasons. Aegeus was a king, which accounted for some of them, and Aegeus was immensely rich, which accounted for the rest. Though the king and queen of Mycenae would have shrunk from a smelly, verminous beggar, might even have had him scourged from the kingdom, a smelly, verminous rich man was another kettle of stinking fish altogether. Whereas the beggar was dirty because he couldn't help it, the rich man must have had his reasons. There must have been something in it, and even if it was only a bad smell, it was a bad smell chosen by a personage rich and powerful enough to have taken his pick. This version of Heracles is much more compelling than the Geraldine McCaughrean version. Like, they really make you feel how he loved his kids, and then how horrified he was when he found out that he had killed them, and how guilty he felt. His battles with the monsters are actually portrayed more like psychological battles, which I think works better for a book. Like, action scenes are more of a movie thing. Interwoven with this is the original story of this wandering storyteller who, like, he always leaves right before something supernatural is going to happen, or he arrives just after it's happened. So as the book goes on, he comes to disbelieve in the supernatural, and he feels that his life is just random and meaningless, while we reading the book can see that he's really part of a larger design. A kind of weird thing about both God Beneath the Sea and The Golden Shadow is that they both end by foreshadowing the myths of the Trojan War, but Leon Garfield and Edward Blishen never wrote any books about them. Which I guess I'm okay with, since I'm not super into the Trojan War. Part of me kind of wishes, though, they could have done what Geraldine McCaughrean did and write about Perseus and Theseus and everybody. Like, these books about Greek mythology they did write are just so good. My favorite novel inspired by Greek myth is Till We Have Faces, a myth retold by C.S. Lewis. It retells the story of Cupid and Psyche, which is actually a Roman myth, not a Greek one, but who cares? Anyway, it retells it from the point of view of Psyche's evil sister, and she makes the case that she really wasn't evil. I'm not really a big fan of the villain makes the case that they really weren't a villain stories. Like, they can be done well, but they've been done. However, this one is really good. Actually, probably the best way to sum it up would be with a quote from the Lego Batman movie.
You're not a traditional bad guy, but you're not exactly a good guy either.
Now, I know some people may be put off of this book because it was written by a famous Christian apologist, and make no mistake, this book ultimately does have a Christian message behind it. In fact, it makes the case for the most offensive parts of Christianity, how Christianity turns a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. Insert mother-in-law joke there. But I'd really encourage you to give it a chance, even if you think you're going to be offended by it. Like, because the writing is really beautiful. Maybe even better than the last two books I talked about. Like, okay, here's how it describes the Psyche at the beginning, who is like the most beautiful princess in the world. Like, that's a very cliche thing. Like, how many fairy tales start with a character being the most beautiful princess? But he found a great original way to describe it. Of Psyche's beauty, at every age, the beauty proper to that age, there's only this to be said, that there were no two opinions about it from man or woman once she had been seen. It was beauty that did not astonish you till afterwards, when you had gone out of sight of her and reflected on it. While she was with you, you were not astonished. It seemed the most natural thing in the world. She was what every woman, or even every thing, ought to have been and meant to be, but had missed by some trip of chance. Indeed, when you looked at her, You believed for a moment that they had not missed it. She made beauty all round her. When she trod on mud, the mud was beautiful. When she ran in the rain was silver. When she picked up a toad, she had the strangest and I thought unchanciest love for all manner of brutes. The toad became beautiful. Initially, there's this ambiguity in the book. Like when Psyche is sacrificed on a mountain because people are worshiping her instead of Aphrodite. Like, does Aphrodite really exist? And is she really being punished? Or is the priest just doing this because, like, is the priest just telling people this is Aphrodite's will because he doesn't want people worshiping Psyche instead of her? Then he'd lose his power. And when Orwell, the sister, the main character, meets Psyche again and she says she's the bride of a god, like, is it true or is Psyche crazy? Like, what kind of a story is this? I mean, okay, if you know the myth of Cupid and Psyche, you know that, yes, the gods do exist in this story and Psyche is now married to Cupid. But reading it, it's easy to forget that and not know what to believe. So I'm really sympathizing with Orwell's dilemma as to what she should believe. And maybe that's why I don't totally hate her when she does the wrong thing. And she does a lot of wrong things. But while a lot of her actions and attitudes are terrible, I still like her. Maybe it's because she and I are alike in a way. I try not to show it on YouTube, but I have anger issues. I know what it's like to be angry all the time and feel like the universe is out to get you. And I have less excuse than she does. Actually, a lot of characters in this book, like, they have unexpected deaths. Orwell's the biggest example, but she's not the only one. The book really keeps you on your toes. Like, okay, after Orwell has been really abusive to her sister and we've kind of lost all sympathy, then we get a scene where she stands up to her cruel father and we're really, like, cheering for her. And in one scene, she meets this priest character who tells her the traditional version of Cupid and Psyche. And he seems, not, he just seems kind of dumb. Like, he can only repeat the party line. He can't really answer any of Orwell's questions about his religion. But then, like, the last thing he says is really interesting and actually throws everything that Orwell has been writing into question, basically the whole book. This book really keeps you on your toes, just like real life. Every time I read it, I find different interpretive possibilities or little nuances that I missed before. Like the parallels between Orwell and the character she hates. That's kind of part of the book's message. We are who we hate. And the writing is just so moving. Like, the best description of it actually comes in the book itself. So full of passion, it would have moved you even if it spoke happy or careless things. But now, who could resist it? It would have broken a heart of iron. By the way, if you're coming to this book from a really anti-God perspective, as opposed to, like, a non-passionate atheist, you might actually really like the beginning of the book where it makes the argument against the gods, but you're probably not going to like the ending, so maybe you could just read part of it and then stop. Me, I think the ending is beautiful. I love it. So, those are my favorite novels inspired by Greek or Roman mythology. What are some of yours? I've heard good things about the books of Madeline Miller, like Circe, but I confess haven't been able to get into them yet. I find their style a little bland compared to, like, that of Leon Garfield or C.S. Lewis. What do you think?